Hello, this is my first video on YouTube, and I just want to point out that something that's kind of troubling. We see the Eastern Orthodoxy, they point to apostolic succession. They point to, holding the traditions that are passed down from the early church. And, those are good things, but, they painted themselves into a corner and they're kind of in a bind. They can't, they, The Second Council of Nicaea condemned anyone who does not salute or kiss the holy and venerable things, in other words, icons. And their system holds that these kind of councils are infallible. They say that they're being led by the Holy Spirit through these, so they're infallible. So, you know, unless you're willing to accept that one has to kiss the holy and venerable images or icons to be saved, you have to reject Eastern Orthodoxy. And they can't wiggle out of it because they've declared that their councils are infallible. So, Exhibit One, I asked AI, um, did the Council of Nicaea anathemize anyone who did not venerate icons? And yes, okay. And so anyone who does not salute or kiss the holy and venerable images is anathema. In other words, they're not saved. All right. They're also termed excommunicated, but if you're excommunicated from the Lord, of course, he's gonna say, "I never knew you," right? Equivalent to being unsaved. And then I asked AI, does the Eastern Orthodox believe that the ecumenical councils are guided by the Holy Spirit and are infallible? In other words, incapable of error. And yes, that's AI came back with yes. So in the Orthodoxy, it says they recognize only the decrees of the councils between 325 and 787 as universally infallible. But this whole declaration of needing to kiss the holy and venerable images occurred during that period. Okay. So it's a very strong logical argument that unless you venerate icons, you're not saved. But let's look at the New Testament. What do Jesus, Peter, and Paul say? And it boils down to they taught that faith and public confession are required for salvation. And these are the three scriptures I have. The one from Paul doesn't mention baptism, but it does mention confession. And I consider baptism to be a type of confession. So it is, they're all a public confession, right? And then another point was there was an early attempt to include additional requirements for salvation, and that was rejected by the apostles and in the first council, the Jerusalem um, council that happened in Acts 15. Some of the Jewish Christians um, wanted to require Gentile believers keep the Jewish law. And then the apostles and other church leaders met in Jerusalem and decided that's not the case. They rejected that. And they said they only recommended four activities that are mentioned in Acts 15:20 and Acts 21:25, which is about 15 years later. So it's the importance of Acts 21:25 is not they didn't add anything in those 15 years. So it wasn't like they only required for Gentile believers at the beginning and they were going to just add more later on. No, these four requirements apply to non-native resident Israelites in Leviticus 17 and 18. So that's where they came from. They're fairly simple. Point three, if the apostles did not demand Gentile believers keep Jewish law, why would a foreign concept of icon veneration be suddenly required about 750 years later by the Ecumenical Council? I mean, this whole icon veneration is completely foreign to anything in the Old Testament or New Testament. And, there's nothing about, I mean, yeah, we should honor, people that gave their lives for the gospel, but, carrying around pictures of them and venerating them after they're passed away, where is that from? And it seems like it's easily confused with idol worship. It just appears to be an emotional knee jerk overreaction by people at that time. Certainly not from the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit um, exalts Jesus, and Jesus exalted the Father. Out of the Holy Spirit, uh, his role is not to venerate saints. So, although the Eastern Orthodoxy claims to represent the one true church, and they point to apostolic succession, again, they painted themselves into a corner by requiring something never addressed in the Bible as being required for salvation. And they cannot now say, well, we've overstepped because they claim inerrancy on this matter. So unless one is going to accept icon veneration as being required for salvation, you must reject Eastern Orthodoxy. Um, they've had over 1,000 years to try to recant all this, and they haven't. They're just not going to. And there's a lot of other things I can point to, but that's all I want to talk to in this YouTube. Goodbye.